I live again, yet I am wet and glistening on paper.
A dialectical contradiction, Professor.
Welcome to 1337, the future of podcasts of books. I'm Max, your host, diving into epic tales and hidden gems.
And I'm Sophia, here to unpack the art of storytelling and the pages that move us. We're exploring novels, classics, and the craft behind the words. What if two of history's really towering, but also profoundly different, intellectual giants could actually sit down? Not for some, stuffy, formal debate, but for a more spontaneous, maybe sometimes uncomfortable, exploration of the ideas that have shaped billions of lives.
Yeah, imagine being a fly on the wall for that conversation.
Exactly. Witnessing every logical probe, every maybe evasion, and every startling revelation that might come out of it.
It's the kind of scenario that just sparks endless fascination, right? Yeah. The sheer intellectual friction there, the clash of worldviews, it would be, immense. And especially when those ideas have had such monumental real-world consequences, the stakes feel almost unimaginably high.
You've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. And today, that's precisely the unique journey we're setting out on.
Okay.
We're diving deep into something really quite exceptional. Peter Kreeft's book, Socrates Meets Marx, an afterlife philosophical confrontation. Now, this isn't, a standard historical novel. No dragons, no hidden treasures here.
Right, not that kind of story.
Instead, it's a brilliant example of what's called a Socratic dialogue. It's this literary form where you, our curious listener, get to eavesdrop as Socrates, history's ultimate truth seeker, engages Karl Marx, the passionate revolutionary, in a really rigorous, sometimes genuinely painful cross-examination of his most famous work, the Communist Manifesto.
It's a masterful setup, really, because it gives Socrates this almost omniscient historical perspective, something that's just impossible in a typical debate, isn't it?
Totally.
He arrives sort of armed with the knowledge of the actual outcomes, the real-world fallout, you could say, of Marx's theories.
Right, which is crucial.
And this lets him push Marx, really push him, to confront the, often chilling historical reality of his ideas. It makes the whole theoretical debate devastatingly concrete.
Our mission today, then, is to pull out the absolute best insights and the key takeaways from this utterly fascinating material. We'll carefully explore the ingenious format of this dialogue, we'll delve into the fundamental philosophical clashes it presents, and we'll confront the, frankly, chilling historical consequences that Socrates, using his unique afterlife insight, reveals to Marx. Think of this deep dive as your shortcut, maybe, to getting genuinely well-informed about these core arguments and insights.
Yeah, and hopefully with plenty of those aha moments we all look for when trying to connect these big, profound ideas to our own world.
Exactly. Yeah. Those moments of clarity.
And this is really far from just some dry academic exercise. The book itself, this dialogue, it makes incredibly complex philosophical ideas remarkably accessible. It acts like a friendly guide, albeit a pretty relentless one sometimes.
Yes, relentless is a good word for Socrates.
It guides you through this intellectual terrain that might otherwise feel, pretty daunting.
That accessibility is, I think, a real superpower here. Because whether you're a seasoned philosophy buff, maybe someone who's wrestled with the Communist Manifesto directly, or you're just dipping your toes into these huge intellectual waters for the first time, you'll gain immense clarity on some of humanity's biggest, most enduring questions. What is truth, really? What does it genuinely mean to be human? And how do ideas, once they're unleashed, shape, or sometimes tragically, warp our world?
It really helps us understand the immense, almost frightening power that ideas can have. And it encourages the kind of clear, critical thinking that's just indispensable today, isn't it? In a world overflowing with information and, let's be honest, persuasive narratives trying to sway us.
Absolutely. And plus, despite the heavy subject matter, there's actually a surprising amount of wit and cleverness embedded right there in the exchange between them.
Yeah, even as the stakes get incredibly high, especially for Marx, as the conversation unfolds.
Right. Okay, so let's begin by unpacking the unique stage where this intellectual showdown happens. Because the format of Socrates Meets Marx is absolutely central to its power and, crucially, its accessibility.
Good place to start.
It's built on this thing called a Socratic dialogue. Now, for those maybe unfamiliar, a Socratic dialogue isn't just any old conversation. It's a carefully crafted, thought-provoking exchange. It's specifically designed to introduce or review fundamental philosophical questions.
All right, the big ones.
The really big questions, yeah. The ones that get right at the heart of reality itself. That's metaphysics, how we get knowledge, what we can actually know epistemology, what it truly means to be human anthropology. Questions of right and wrong ethics, the rules of sound reasoning logic, and, the methods we use to pursue truth. All that foundational stuff.
And the brilliance of this particular format, especially how Peter Kreeft uses it here, is that it's designed to be short, clear, and non-technical. That distinction is absolutely critical, I think.
Why is that?
Well, it means that while it grapples with profoundly complex ideas, it does it in a way that's super accessible for pretty much everyone, not just people with PhDs in philosophy.
Right.
The book itself even suggests it's perfect for classroom use and for educational do-it-yourselfers. It's basically philosophy made approachable.
I found that really powerful. It's like having a friendly, incredibly patient guide leading you through these huge, sometimes intimidating concepts.
Yeah.
Instead of a dense, dry textbook just stating theories, you get this dynamic back and forth. It's almost like watching a play unfold.
Mm-hmm.
It really balances summaries of complex ideas with memorable details and vivid examples, which honestly helps these abstract things take root and stick in your mind, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a wonderful way to learn without feeling that usual weight of being totally overwhelmed by jargon or dense prose.
And that accessibility, that inherent approachability, it's amplified by the wonderfully imaginative premise, Socrates and Marx meet in the afterlife.
Which sounds a bit out there at first, maybe.
It does, but the book is very upfront about it. It says you don't even need to believe in an afterlife to enjoy it. It just asks for a willing suspension of disbelief.
Like a narrative device, really.
Yeah.
A thought experiment to make this extraordinary conversation possible.
Exactly. It's this unique what-if scenario that immediately gives you a fresh lens to look at these towering historical figures and their monumental ideas.
And here's the crucial part, like you mentioned before. This afterlife setting isn't just some clever narrative trick. It fundamentally empowers Socrates. It gives him knowledge of historical outcomes.
Right. He knows what happened after Marx wrote the manifesto, after his ideas took hold in the real world.
And that foresight becomes this devastating yet utterly essential element of his cross-examination. It means the dialogue isn't just theory bumping against theory.
No.
It's theory being confronted by the unvarnished, sometimes brutal truth of reality.
Precisely. And Socrates' role here is explicitly defined. He's the host of this afterlife meeting and the cross-examiner.
But what's really fascinating is his underlying goal, isn't it? He's not trying to win an argument for himself, not trying to score points or prove he's smarter.
No, not at all.
His ultimate goal, maybe even a compassionate one in a strange way, is to help Marx know thyself. Socrates actually tells Marx directly that he's been sent to teach him this fundamental task, a task which Marx apparently cannot escape in this afterlife world of truth.
That's such a profound shift from a typical debate dynamic, isn't it? Socrates acts like a mirror for Marx's mind. He reflects Marx's own ideas and their consequences back to him so he can examine them.
Yeah. The source material notes that Socrates masterfully balances this gentle, probing inquiry with a really firm, almost unyielding insistence on logical consistency and empirical evidence.
Even when that evidence clearly causes Marx immense distress and anger.
Right. He understands the torture he's inflicting, as the book puts it, but he seems to believe it's for Marx's ultimate spiritual and intellectual good. It's this compassionate yet utterly relentless pursuit of truth, pushing Marx to face things he might otherwise try to evade.
And that dynamic really sets up the central conflicts and challenges of the whole dialogue. Socrates has to overcome Marx's, deep-seated stubbornness and his frequent attempts to dodge the questions.
Oh, yeah. Marx frequently tries to derail the conversation, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
He dismisses Socrates' arguments as just abstract logic, or calls them personal insults, or even accuses Socrates of being a spy at one point.
Right. And Socrates, in turn, sometimes has to resort to pointed teasing or these clever little logical tricks to expose Marx's contradictions and force him back into the conversation.
All while steadfastly sticking to his core Socratic mission. Just mirroring back the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. It's a real test of intellectual endurance on both sides.
And then just looming over the entire discussion is the immense weight of history that Socrates carries into the room, so to speak. He has this incredibly difficult, almost somber task of delivering truly devastating truths to Marx, the catastrophic failures of his system when it was actually put into practice, and the immense, almost unimaginable suffering it caused across the globe.
Yeah, that moves it from just an intellectual game into a profound reckoning with a horrific legacy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It shifts from the theoretical to the tragically concrete.
Absolutely. Ultimately, Socrates really stands as the embodiment of that classical philosophical tradition, the one that fundamentally believes in universal, unchanging truths, objective justice, and a consistent, albeit complex, human nature.
And his core challenge throughout the whole dialogue is to uphold those concepts against Marx's historical relativism, his staunch materialism, and his unwavering economic determinism.
He tries to show their coherence and necessity in a way that might penetrate Marx's really determined ideological defenses.
Even when Marx tries that move of claiming that understanding itself means a different thing to communists from what it means to non-communists, which is basically a way to shut down any external criticism.
Right? Exactly. It's a classic defense mechanism. So it becomes a battle not just of ideas, but of fundamentally different worldviews. Okay, so with that stage now set for this intense philosophical confrontation, let's shift our focus to the subject of this meticulous cross-examination, the Communist Manifesto.
The book itself.
Right. And even Socrates, despite his profound fundamental disagreements with Marx, readily acknowledges the sheer, undeniable, almost terrifying impact of this short pamphlet. He tells Marx directly, "Your book changed the world." It's just an undeniable historical fact.
And Socrates doesn't pull any punches when he's quantifying that impact either.
Yeah.
He states that Marx made a greater difference to historical events and to the lives of more people than any other human being in modern history.
That's a staggering claim, isn't it? Especially coming from someone like Socrates.
It really underscores the manifesto's monumental influence, and it recognizes that ideas, once they're put out into the world, can gain this terrifying momentum all their own.
And Marx, of course, he isn't shy about his own assessment of it.
Not at all.
He proudly declares it a great book because, in his own words, it finally solves the mystery of man and lays bare the most fundamental laws that have always governed human behavior.
Wow.
He even goes so far as to claim it was the first to make history truly scientific. Talk about a bold, all-encompassing vision for just a pamphlet.
It's a claim to have basically unlocked the very code of human existence, a testament to his confidence or maybe his unwavering conviction in his own intellectual achievement.
But Socrates isn't just impressed by its impact or Marx's self-assessment of its scientific rigor. He also praises Marx's powerful writing style, doesn't he? Calling the manifesto a rhetorical masterpiece.
Yeah, he notes that Marx's wonderful speech about it was admirably clear and simple, powerful and appealing, and that Marx was truly a great rhetorician. And that's a crucial observation coming from Socrates, because it highlights that the manifesto wasn't just intended as a logical argument. It was crafted for maximum persuasive power. It wasn't just theory. It was rhetoric designed to move people.
That's incredibly high praise for a work he's about to dissect with such, well, surgical precision. It really underscores that the Communist Manifesto wasn't meant to be just a dry theoretical text for academics locked away in ivory towers.
No, it was crafted to move people, to incite revolution, to change the world through sheer force of conviction and language. The book itself notes how it brilliantly combines an extended logical argument with memorable rhetoric.
Designed to be persuasive and revolutionary, not just descriptive analysis, it was a call to arms disguised as a scientific treatise, maybe.
Absolutely. It shows a profound understanding on Marx's part that for ideas to truly change the world, they need to be not only reasoned, but also eloquently articulated and, importantly, emotionally resonant. He knew the most powerful ideas often ignite the passions, not just stimulate the intellect.
Okay, so if that's the intention and the massive impact, what is the core argument of this short yet clearly earth-shattering pamphlet?
Well, Marx presents it as a short pamphlet of only 12,000 words, containing the essentials of communism. And his formula for all of human history is famously succinct, almost disturbingly so. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles.
Everything flows from that single principle.
In Marx's view, yes.
Yeah.
Everything. It's the master key to understanding every past event and predicting every future one. For him, history is driven purely by economic determinism, specifically through the engine of class conflict.
Okay.
He argues that the modern era, the 19th century when he was writing, had simplified the complex, multi-layered class structures of earlier periods, like feudalism.
Right, with lords and serfs and guilds and all that.
Exactly, down to just two primary antagonists. The bourgeoisie, whom he defines as the owners of the means of production, the capitalists, and the proletariat, the vast majority of laborers who, because they don't own capital, are forced to sell their labor, their wages, to survive. And this isn't just a description for him. It's a diagnosis of an inherent, inevitable struggle.
And this stark reduction to just two opposing classes in Marx's framework, that sets the stage for what? What does he predict?
For what he claims will be the final worldwide proletarian revolution. This revolution, according to Marx, would decisively eliminate the bourgeoisie and usher in a truly classless society.
Which he famously calls the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Well, that's seen as a transitional phase. He envisions it ultimately leading to a state of perfect equality and justice, a utopian society where the very concept of class just vanishes.
And crucially, Marx believes this revolution will actually end history itself, at least as he defines history.
Right, because history, for him, is fundamentally defined by social change caused by class conflict. So once class conflict ceases, history, in his specific scientific sense, would also cease.
Wow, that's an incredibly ambitious, almost messianic vision, isn't it? Promising not just a new society, but an end to the very dynamics that have driven human existence for millennia.
It really is. It's total transformation he's predicting.
Okay, now we arrive at the real heart of this afterlife philosophical confrontation, Socrates' relentless, piercing cross-examination. And he begins, as is his timeless custom, with that deceptively simple yet profoundly persistent question to Marx about the Communist Manifesto. Is it true?
Not is it influential, not is it persuasive.
Exactly, but simply, is it true?
And Marx's initial response is incredibly telling, isn't it? It immediately signals a core area of philosophical disagreement. He basically equates truth with success. He says, it changed the world, didn't it? It succeeded.
For him, the demonstrable impact, the success, is the proof of its truthfulness.
Right, but Socrates, ever the unyielding truth seeker, doesn't let that slide for a second. He immediately challenges this pragmatic, results-oriented view of truth.
How does he do that?
He asks Marx, couldn't a lie be successful if the liar persuaded others to believe it, and if he had his way and his will with them? He presses further, probing whether, if success defines truth, then maybe a God manifesto, referring to religious texts, would be true by Marx's own standard if it created widespread belief and changed the world.
Ooh, that's a sharp point.
Yeah, he points out, quite pointedly, that Christianity, by Marx's own standard of world-changing power and success, should logically be considered more true than communism. That really puts Marx on the spot.
So how does Marx respond to that?
Well, this relentless Socratic questioning forces Marx to clarify, to refine his definition. He concedes, maybe a bit begrudgingly, that truth is correspondence with objective reality, and that it is, in fact, objective.
Ah, okay, so they establish a common ground there.
Exactly. It's a critical philosophical agreement, setting a shared understanding of truth for the rest of the dialogue. It's foundational, even though Marx will later try to conveniently abandon it when his theories are really under pressure. It's the first step in holding him to his own stated standard.
Okay, so moving beyond the fundamental nature of truth itself, Socrates then directly tackles Marx's central historical premise, that sweeping claim that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles.
His universal lens for everything.
Right. Marx defines these struggles as constant and uninterrupted opposition, like freeman versus slave, lord versus serf, guildmaster versus journeyman.
Socrates, ever the empirical observer, immediately presses on counter-instances. He asks, with that calm persistence, have classes sometimes cooperated, for instance, against foreign enemies or for religious purposes?
Good question.
And he also raises a really fundamental, subtle, but crucial question. Do people always feel oppressed? Or is the oppression merely structural, even if people are happy and don't perceive themselves as oppressed?
That's interesting. The difference between objective structure and subjective feeling.
Exactly. He uses these vivid, almost absurd analogies, like talking about war among pacifists or hunger among the satiated, to question how class conflict can truly exist if it's not actually experienced or felt by anyone. It's a brilliant way to expose the potential gap between an abstract theoretical construct and actual lived human experience.
So how does Marx handle that? Does he redefine?
He does. He insists that the oppression is structural, not necessarily psychological.
Yeah.
In his view, it exists inherently within the economic classes themselves, even if individuals don't consciously feel it.
And if they don't feel it?
Well, Marx suggests, rather condescendingly, that if people didn't feel it, they were simply oppressed, but too stupid to realize it.
Wow. Okay. That's a convenient way to maintain the theory, regardless of evidence, isn't it?
It certainly allows him to dismiss individual experience. And this leads Socrates to a truly crucial point about the supposed scientific nature of Marxism. Marx repeatedly claims his system is scientific and empirical. So, Socrates and Marx agree on a fundamental principle of any scientific claim. It must be empirically verifiable and, just as importantly, it has to be falsifiable.
What does falsifiable mean in this context?
It means there has to be some conceivable empirical evidence that could disprove the claim. Socrates explains this by asking, for instance, what empirical evidence could possibly disprove a religious claim about divine providence. If a belief cannot, in principle, be disproven by any empirical observation, then it isn't really science. It's more like a dogma, an article of faith.
Okay, the acid test. So how does Socrates apply this to Marx?
He applies it directly to Marx's core assertions. He asks Marx to describe any non-oppressive, non-communist historical society that would serve as evidence to disprove his claim that all history is class conflict.
And can Marx do it?
He struggles immensely. He can only really describe future communist societies as non-oppressive. He literally cannot conceive of or describe a past or present non-communist society that isn't oppressed, according to his own definition.
So what's Socrates' conclusion then?
Socrates, with chilling clarity, concludes that Marx's belief is, in fact, religious, or a priori, rather than truly scientific. It's a priori because it's true by definition. In his framework, oppressive simply means non-communist, and therefore it can never actually be empirically disproved by any historical example.
And how does Marx take that?
This powerful observation visibly angers Marx. He vehemently rejects the label religious for his supposedly scientific system. It's a profound moment in the dialogue, really unmasking the ideological core beneath the scientific veneer.
Wow. Okay, so the conversation then moves on to Marx's really radical assertion about human nature itself, right? He claims it's created and changed entirely by social conditions.
Yeah, and that the revolution will produce a new man. A human being entirely free of conflicts or selfishness, which is an incredibly ambitious, almost godlike promise coming from a materialist thinker.
It really is. So how does Socrates challenge this?
He asks, why then can human nature never change before the revolution? If human nature is entirely determined by social structure, why couldn't individuals change or transcend their conditions before the revolution actually happens?
Makes sense. Does he offer examples?
He does. He introduces the saints as powerful empirical data, men and women like Thomas More who, despite living in what Marx would call very bad societies, managed to live very good, selfless lives. These individuals present a direct, inconvenient contradiction to Marx's deterministic view.
So these saints are like counter-evidence to Marx's claim about human nature being totally malleable by economics.
Exactly. And Socrates, again, with his gentle but firm logic, labels Marx's belief. The belief that genuine sanctity or selflessness is impossible before the revolution, that all apparently good deeds before then are just disguised selfishness, he labels that belief as religious.
Why religious again?
Because it's based on no data at all, Socrates argues, and it actively refuses to allow empirical data, like the undeniable lives of saints throughout history, to refute it. It becomes an article of faith for Marx, not a scientific conclusion based on observation.
And the conversation escalates from there, doesn't it? Revealing a really striking claim from Marx.
Oh, absolutely. He promises to achieve a greater difference in human nature than anyone has ever done before, a greater difference than Christ or Buddha. He envisions this society of selfless, sinless social saints, a total transformation of humanity.
Achieved how?
Achieved simply by removing the obstacle of private property. And Socrates, provocatively, but accurately, points out that this removal is achieved through theft.
Which raises a huge question.
A critical one. Can theft, a morally dubious act by most standards, truly be the cause of such a profound, almost miraculous transformation from sinners to saints? It's a profound ethical dilemma right at the heart of his utopian vision.
And as if that isn't deep enough, Socrates dives even further, challenging Marx's core belief that free will is an illusion, right?
Yeah, the idea that everything is fundamentally determined by social and economic forces. Individuals, in Marx's view, are just instruments of history. Even our thoughts are just effects of material conditions, not independent causes that can shape events.
So how does Socrates pick that apart?
He immediately highlights the glaring, almost comical contradiction. If everything is determined, including Marx's own thoughts and actions, then why on earth did he bother to write a manifesto to persuade people? Why make all those personal sacrifices for a revolution that's supposedly inevitable anyway?
Huh. Good point. Does he use analogies?
He does, these pointed, almost humorous ones. Like, Is writing a book like preparing a gear shift manifesto for a machine that will inevitably change gears anyway? Or maybe an amphibian manifesto for a tadpole that's inevitably going to become a frog? It just exposes the logical absurdity of a determined individual writing a persuasive text aimed at changing minds.
How does Marx try to get out of that one?
He tries to escape the trap by claiming his book is actually a necessary cause of the inevitable revolution. He sees himself as merely an instrument of destiny, his writing part of the inevitable unfolding.
But Socrates doesn't let him off the hook that easily, does he?
Not at all. He pushes further, exposing the circular logic. If thoughts are merely discharges from our brains, maybe like cerebral flatulence, as the book colorfully puts it,
Okay.
and all thoughts are equally material, meaning sane thoughts are no more true or valid in a material sense than insane thoughts, then why should anyone pay attention to Marx's ideas over the random ramblings of a lunatic?
Wow, that's a devastating point. It undermines the very basis of his own intellectual authority, doesn't it?
It really does. It implies a self-refuting argument for Marx's materialism. It's a fundamental challenge to the very credibility of his entire philosophical system.
So where does Marx go from there? Does he try to define freedom differently?
He attempts to define communist freedom, yes, but not as freedom of thought or individual choice, which Socrates values. For Marx, it's freedom from want, freedom from war, freedom from crime.
Okay. Material freedoms.
Right. And he further argues that understanding itself means a different thing to communists from what it means to non-communists, implying you essentially have to become a communist to truly understand it, not the other way around.
Which sounds familiar.
Exactly. Socrates shrewdly compares this to the pronouncements of religious mystics who often claim, unless you believe, you will not understand. Again, Marx's supposed science starts to look an awful lot like religious faith or dogma.
This brings us to what the book calls the key philosophical point of difference between them, right? The fundamental status of ideas themselves.
Yes, materialism versus, well, something else. Marx's position is described using the technical term epiphenomenalism.
Can you break that down?
Sure. It basically means that ideas are seen as effects, but not causes. They're not observable phenomena, only epiphenomena. Think of them like the heat generated by an electrical machine. It's a real byproduct, but it dissipates and doesn't actually affect how the machine runs.
So ideas are just like steam rising off the engine of history. They don't steer it.
Pretty much. The ultimate cause of ideas, for Marx, is always the socioeconomic system. Ideas don't drive history. The material conditions of history drive ideas.
How does Socrates counter that?
He uses his own analogies, drawing on his classical understanding. He likens the brain maybe to a writer's pen or the physical syllables of a poem to its meaning. He argues that while material changes might correlate with mental ones, like brain activity and thought, it doesn't automatically prove materialism the idea that only matter is real.
What other possibilities are there?
He points out that the available data, the correlation, is equally compatible with dualism. The idea that mind and matter are distinct but interacting substances, or even idealism, the philosophical position that all reality is fundamentally mental or mind-dependent.
So he's showing Marx that materialism is just one interpretation, not the only logical one.
Exactly. It's a profound intellectual chess move. He's showing Marx that his scientific materialism is just one philosophical stance among others, and maybe not even the most coherent one based on the evidence we have.
And this leads to one of Socrates' most stark, maybe most cutting conclusions in the entire dialogue.
It really does. He tells Marx flat out that his ideas are so utterly absurd, so logically self-contradictory, and also so insulting and demeaning to humanity. He even implies they could have proceeded only from the mind of a great man-hater and self-hater from a spiritual death wish.
Wow, that's incredibly strong language.
It is. He goes as far as to call Marx a terrorist in philosophy, not just a mere tyrant. It reflects this profound moral and intellectual revulsion Socrates feels towards the logical endpoint and maybe the underlying spirit of Marx's philosophy. He suggests Marx's theories aren't just wrong, but spiritually corrosive. And this is where the conversation takes an even more sobering, maybe even darker turn. It moves with this unflinching directness from the philosophical critique to the brutal, undeniable reality of history.
The consequences.
Yes, Socrates, armed with his unique afterlife knowledge, delivers these devastating truths about the actual historical outcomes of Marx's predictions.
It's the ultimate empirical test of Marx's scientific claims, isn't it? And the results, as Socrates presents them, are stark, almost tragically ironic.
They really are, contrary to Marx's fervent prophecy that capitalism would inevitably collapse under its own contradictions.
Yeah. What actually happened according to Socrates?
Bourgeois capitalism, as Marx called it, would grow continually in both size and power. It became, as Socrates reveals, the only economically successful system on Earth, making more people more prosperous and more content than any alternative. It fundamentally defied Marx's central prediction about its demise.
But Socrates also acknowledges that communism did rise to power, didn't it?
Oh yes, it ruled nearly half the world for the better part of the 20th century. However, and this is crucial, it did so not through the peaceful, spontaneous, worker-led revolution Marx envisioned.
How then?
But, as Socrates chillingly recounts, through lies, assassinations, and terror, and once it was in power, it ruled by force, becoming a totalitarian system in practice.
And the human cost. Marx believed his system would bring about perfect justice.
The human cost, as presented by Socrates, is truly staggering, horrifying. He confronts Marx with the fact that his ideology led to more deaths, more destruction, more murders, more misery, more mayhem than any other ideology in history.
How many?
The book stinks the figure well over 100 million people killed. And Socrates doesn't just give numbers, he cites specific, horrifying examples to drive the point home. One communist dictator in China killed 50 million political enemies. Another in Cambodia murdered 1/3 of his country's people. Another in Russia engineered mass starvation of millions and set up an enormous network throughout his nation of secret police and concentration camps.
Good grief. That's just unimaginable. A truly chilling list, revealing this immense chasm between the theoretical promise and the actual historical outcome.
It's a direct, undeniable refutation by history itself of Marx's scientific predictions about progress and liberation. And maybe the final, most humiliating blow to Marx's vision of eternal triumph.
What's that?
Is that communism ultimately died, not by some external counter-revolution, not by military defeat, but simply because no one wanted it anymore or believed it anymore. It just withered from within, collapsing under the weight of its own internal contradictions, its economic failures, and its devastating human cost.
And then there's that painful, almost darkly comedic irony Socrates brings up about National Socialism, about Nazism.
Yeah, Socrates reveals that this system, which Marx obviously vehemently despised, ironically shared many structural similarities with communism: the totalitarian control, the state terror, the suppression of dissent.
And it arose partly because of communism.
Socrates suggests it arose in part from the fear of communism and nearly destroyed the world. And then, to twist the knife further, he points out that the man most associated with it, Adolf Hitler, eerily resembled Marx in certain personal tendencies and became probably the most hated man in history, a sort of tragic, distorted echo.
Wow. This historical reckoning then brings the conversation to a critical ethical point, doesn't it? Exposing Marx's disturbing embrace of the end justifies the means.
Absolutely. Socrates directly challenges Marx on his apparent praise for the brutal destruction of what Marx himself called idyllic feudalism by the rise of capitalism, a destructive process Marx saw as historically necessary to pave the way for communism.
And how does Marx defend that?
Marx, true to his historical relativism, asserts that good and evil are relative to history. He basically argues that anything, even torture, massacres, or lies, becomes objectively good if it serves the revolution, if it advances the historical dialectic towards the communist endpoint.
So morality just changes depending on the historical stage.
According to Marx, yes. And Socrates, as the unwavering proponent of universal moral truths, gravely warns about the terrifying consequences of abandoning fixed, universal moral standards for pragmatic revolutionary goals. He calls it a terrifying ethical relativism. It means there's no stable, fixed point for justice or morality. It's all just a means to an end, constantly shifting.
And this moral relativism seems to infect Marx's vision for society's core institutions, which Socrates then systematically challenges one by one.
Exactly. It permeates everything. For instance, take private property. Marx aims to abolish bourgeois private property, which he defines as inherently exploitative because it generates profit for the owner rather than the laborer.
Okay. And Socrates' challenge.
Socrates points out the profound ethical irony that the great cause of this transformation from sinners into saints, this creation of the new man, is supposedly going to be achieved through theft, the expropriation of property. He directly questions how such a positive moral transformation could possibly arise from an act widely considered immoral.
Then there's the very notion of individuality. What's Marx's take on that?
Marx aims to abolish what he specifically calls bourgeois individuality. He claims that individuality isn't some fixed, inherent human characteristic, but rather a concept shaped and determined entirely by economic systems. He even makes the astonishing claim that there is no Cartesian, I think, therefore I am. rejecting the very bedrock of modern Western philosophy about selfhood.
And Socrates' response to that?
Socrates highlights the profound irony. Here is Marx, a distinct individual with unique thoughts and a profound historical impact, denying his own fundamental I, while simultaneously expecting the vast masses of people to deny theirs, even though most people instinctively believe in their own individual selves. He calls Marx's position insulting and demeaning to humanity, arguing it strips away a fundamental aspect of human dignity.
Okay, what about the crucial question of motivation for work in a communist society?
Marx believes that communist justice, summed up by that famous principle, from each according to his ability to each according to his need, will naturally motivate people to work diligently without needing competition or personal gain as incentives.
Sounds idealistic. How does Socrates test that?
Socrates, ever the realist about human nature, uses this vivid analogy of grading students in a hypothetical communist class. He asks essentially, will students still study hard if everyone gets the same grade regardless of effort or ability? He questions whether human nature, particularly common tendencies toward laziness or the desire for reward tied to effort, can be so radically changed simply by altering the economic system. It's a practical challenge to the idealism.
And when it comes to culture, art, literature, philosophy,
Marx asserts that bourgeois culture is merely training to act as a machine. He implies that all art, literature, and philosophy produced under capitalism are simply tools of oppression, reinforcing the existing power structure.
and Socrates' counter.
Socrates counters with the undeniable historical reality. Countless great artists, musicians, writers, and thinkers have flourished under capitalism. And ironically, many produce their most profound works precisely as dissidents against the very communist regimes Marx inspired, rather than becoming their loyal supporters. He also points out Marx's frequent use of what would later be called the big lie technique, using gross exaggeration, these monstrous falsehoods intended to stun people into uncritical acceptance rather than engaging in reasoned debate.
The discussion then gets really personal, delving into the very fabric of society, the family, and education.
Yes, Marx advocates for the abolition of the family, specifically the bourgeois family, which he saw as based on capital, private gain, and the exploitation of women and children. He even disturbingly views wives and children as potential instruments of production.
And his alternative.
To replace this, he proposes a community of women, which sounds suspiciously like shared wives, and entirely state-controlled education, fundamentally restructuring the most intimate aspects of human life, removing them from private control.
This is where Socrates really brings in Marx's own personal life, doesn't he? With devastating effect.
He does. He brings up Lenchen Demuth, Marx's longtime housekeeper, and their illegitimate, unacknowledged son, Freddie, who Marx essentially abandoned and forced Engels to claim paternity for. Socrates dramatically implies that Marx's solution to child exploitation by parents is akin to trying to abolish disease by abolishing all those suffering from it, eliminating children and parents as distinct units to end potential exploitation rather than addressing actual exploitation within families.
Wow. And the community of women idea.
Socrates challenges that with a pointed thought experiment. He asks Marx to imagine his own beloved wife, Jenny, having an affair with his closest collaborator and financial backer, Engels. Marx's furious, jealous reaction in the dialogue vividly exposes his personal hypocrisy and his inherently possessive, control-driven view of sex and relationships, completely contradicting his impersonal theory. It's a moment where Marx's grand, impersonal theories just shatter against the reality of his own emotions and actions.
So Socrates questions the whole premise of replacing something known, like the family, even with its flaws, with a completely unknown, untested ideal.
Precisely. He shrewdly suggests that Marx, despite all his loud materialist claims, is actually the hidden idealist he so vehemently criticizes in others, someone driven by an abstract, unproven utopian vision rather than concrete reality and human experience.
Finally, the conversation addresses nations and nationality.
Right. Marx argues for the complete abolition of countries and nationality. He famously claims that working men have no country, and believes that having one world would mean no war, a borderless, nationless world utopia.
And Socrates' take on that.
Socrates, ever the practical philosopher, questions this drastic solution too. He asks, is that not like killing the patient to cure the disease, or like amputating a limb to cure a hangnail?
Meaning it's too extreme a solution for the problem.
Exactly. He defends the possibility of healthy patriotism and a positive national identity, acknowledging its potential dangers like egoism or jingoism, but arguing against Marx's proposed euthanasia of nations altogether. He sees value in these smaller loyalties.
And does he bring in historical reality again?
Yes, he points out the undeniable empirical fact that working-class people are often more patriotic, not less, than wealthier, more cosmopolitan classes. Yet another observation from real life that directly contradicts Marx's theoretical claims about the proletariat having no country.
Throughout all of this relentless cross-examination, Socrates doesn't just critique Marx's ideas in isolation, does he? He seems to masterfully use Marx's own words, his poetry, his letters, details from his personal life.
Absolutely. To illuminate the man behind the philosophy, he reveals Marx as described in the source material. Stubborn and dismissive, a profound egotist who frequently used his own brand of teasing or logical tricks to expose contradictions in others, yet seemed utterly blind to his own glaring inconsistencies.
There's also mention of a darker side to his character.
Yes. Socrates points to what he sees as a profound hatred and misanthropy driving Marx's character. This is apparently evident in Marx's frequent quoting of a chilling line from Goethe's Faust. Everything that exists deserves to perish.
Wow.
He highlights how Marx's own youthful poems thrived on themes of catastrophe, violence, apocalypse, pacts with the devil, and suicide. Socrates starkly contrasts Marx's apparent intellectual joy at the prospect of societal destruction with an inability, in Socrates' view, to rejoice at the sight of a mother nursing a baby or of a loving, contented, happy private family in their own home enjoying each other's company and the simple pleasures of nature. It's painted as a truly damning psychological portrait.
And he also exposes Marx's personal bigotry and intellectual dishonesty.
Yes, Socrates cites specific instances, like Marx calling his rival, the German labor leader Ferdinand Lassalle, racist and anti-Semitic slurs like the Jewish nigger and a greasy Jew. And then the accusations of hypocrisy and intellectual dishonesty come thick and fast. Socrates labels Marx a great propagandist, precisely because he was allegedly a great thief who plagiarized famous phrases and powerful rhetoric from others without attribution, passing them off as his own.
And the personal hypocrisy?
Socrates hammers home the profound contradictions between Marx's personal life and his revolutionary preachings. He notes that Marx despised the actual proletariat, yet called himself a proletarian. That he came from a comfortable, well-to-do middle-class family, but fulminated against everything bourgeois as against hell itself.
And the point about never working in a factory.
Right. Perhaps most strikingly, that he never once in your life set foot in a factory, despite claiming exhaustive expertise on factory workers and their miserable conditions. He exalted work and railed against idleness, yet you never worked except to write, and was apparently a continual and disastrous failure at managing time and money, constantly relying on gifts and loans from others, especially his friend and collaborator, Friedrich Engels.
And the ultimate indictment from Socrates.
The ultimate damning indictment, which Socrates delivers with cold precision according to the text, is that Marx was simply and literally a liar. He's accused of deliberately misquoting figures like the British Prime Minister Gladstone and the economist Adam Smith to make his argument seem stronger, twisting their words to fit his narrative.
So the conclusion is?
Ultimately, Socrates concludes Marx was a thoroughgoing and consummate hypocrite. This personal unveiling is presented as devastating for Marx in the dialogue, and it's a core part of the book's larger message. That there's an intimate connection between the character, the inner world, of a philosopher and the philosophy they produce. Ideas cannot be entirely divorced from the people who conceive and propagate them. So in the end, Socrates Meets Marx delivers this clear, really unavoidable truth about consequences. The book's core message seems to be that ideas, especially ideas as ambitious, as sweeping, and as globally influential as Marx's, have profound, often devastating consequences in the real world. A philosophy that denies objective truth, denies a fixed human nature, denies individual freedom, while also being demonstrably based on internal contradictions and, frankly, profound personal hypocrisy. Well, that philosophy, as Socrates reveals through the lens of history, is doomed to fail and cause immense suffering. It's not just presented as a critique, it's positioned as a historical verdict.
It's a powerful and timeless lesson, isn't it? One that extends far beyond just Marx. The dialogue itself serves as this brilliant demonstration of the Socratic method in action. That constant, unflinching push for clear definitions, for logical consistency, and for a courageous willingness to confront evidence, even, maybe especially, if it contradicts our deeply cherished beliefs.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that genuine understanding and truth come from rigorous, sometimes uncomfortable examination, not just from catchy slogans or purely emotional appeals. It's like a masterclass in how to think clearly amidst all the complexity and noise.
And perhaps the most poignant lesson, particularly for Marx himself, in this imagined afterlife scenario is the inescapable nature of self-knowledge. That ancient Greek imperative, know thyself, is truly paramount here. Marx's forced confrontation with historical facts and his own logical and personal contradictions, it's depicted as a kind of purgatorial process, an unavoidable journey of self-discovery that he simply couldn't escape in this afterlife world of truth. The self, it turns out, can't be escaped. Its true nature and the consequences of its choices will eventually be revealed.
Which ultimately leads to that final provocative thought about choice and perspective within the book, right? Socrates tells Marx that whether his eternal prison, this afterlife of inescapable truth, turns out to be hell or heaven, is up to you.
Meaning
the only choice left to him is how to confront the truths of the choices he made on Earth now that he sees them with total, unblinking clarity. It's this deep existential challenge, forcing Marx to reconcile his past actions and beliefs with their ultimate, undeniable consequences.
it truly forces you, the reader or listener, to consider the profound responsibility that comes with developing, promoting, and acting upon any set of ideas, especially those meant to radically transform society.
Absolutely.
So we've taken a deep dive today into Socrates Meets Marx, exploring its brilliant concept as an afterlife philosophical debate. We've seen how Socrates relentlessly challenges Marx's foundational ideas, everything from the very nature of truth and human nature to the meaning of freedom and justice.
And we've grappled with those stark, undeniable historical facts that the book presents as the ultimate devastating refutation of Marx's predictions and promises.
This deep dive, though, wasn't just about these two historical figures. It was really about the immense, almost terrifying power of ideas and the absolute importance of critical thinking for all of us.
Right. The true value isn't just in knowing what these two men thought, but in witnessing the kind of intellectual rigor that can be applied to examining profoundly influential concepts. It reminds us that truth-seeking is a challenging, often uncomfortable, but ultimately, hopefully, liberating journey.
It really encourages us to look beyond those surface-level narratives and really dig into what's being claimed, why it's being claimed, and what the potential consequences are.
As Socrates says to Marx, and as the book powerfully argues throughout, ideas have consequences.
So after listening to this conversation, maybe consider this for yourself. What deeply held beliefs do you have? Perhaps ones you consider scientific or obvious or inevitable that might actually turn out to be philosophical assumptions or even something like religious beliefs when confronted with rigorous, honest, Socratic questioning.
That's a challenging thought.
And maybe also ask, what are the real-world consequences, both positive and negative, of your own most fundamental assumptions about humanity, about society, and about the nature of truth itself?
We really hope this deep dive encourages you maybe to pick up Peter Kreeft's Socrates Meets Marx, or perhaps even to revisit the Communist Manifesto itself, to engage with these powerful ideas firsthand and experience this unique intellectual confrontation for yourself.
Keep asking those timeless, sometimes childlike but essential questions, but is it true? And keep seeking clarity in a world that often seems to prefer easy slogans over hard-won substance. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Be sure to visit us at 1337podcast.com.
We've got tons of resources and discussions there.
Thank you for joining us on this enlightening adventure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and see you next time.
Strength and honor. I am Spartacus.
Thanks for watching. Tap into 1337podcast.com.